So let's talk about Ukraine, because this has been on the news recently, and things sound pretty dramatic. I think everyone will agree. It's headline news on basically every major news outlet. So I've been getting into the weeds to try and work out what everyone's saying and what is actually happening, and whether there is a large or small discrepancy between them. And then from there to interpret...
Sorry to laugh. It's just, there's going to be a large discrepancy. I haven't looked at any of your segments so far. I have no idea what you're going to tell me, but I already know what the answer is.
But then from there, it's about trying to interpret who's trying to do what, who's actually doing what, and what the general tenor of it is like. So if there's a question to keep in mind here as we go through this segment and all the details, it's who wants what and who is doing what. It's probably the way to analyze this. So developments. Is this all hot air, or is something going to actually happen? That's probably the main question on people's minds. So the situation has been taking a rather strange turn, I think. As far as public statements go, let's check in the noise from Russia. So we have this sort of stuff. We're pulling back troops, but exercises will continue. Seems to be the general statement out of Russia. They say they've pulled some troops back from the border, and there are unverified clips that they've revealed of, for example, tanks and lorries, which they claim are moving away from the border, either in Crimea or in East Donetsk or in Belarus. But then there are lots of other people saying, actually, no, that either that photo was from last year, or it's not the place you say it is, it's somewhere else, or it is the place you say they are, but they're going in the opposite direction towards the border, not away from it. We have this statement as well. We don't want war from Putin. In his conference with Putin and Schultz. And he says here, he stated that Russia did not want war, and he was ready for talks with the US and NATO on limits for missile deployments and military transparency. However, he reiterated that the West had not addressed Russia's security concern with the borders of NATO reaching Russia, and that assurances that Ukraine would not join NATO anytime soon were not enough. Moscow wants a guarantee that Kiev will never become part of the alliance. So that's the statement coming out of Putin. They don't want war, apparently. They're pulling their troops back. And then we have a statement from the Russian ambassador in Ireland that war in Europe would be insane. And he says, he expands on this, but it's ambassador speak. I don't know if you've heard much of ambassadors' public statements, but apart from the Chinese, who are a completely different brand,
who do not care
they're
about
basically
anything.
Agitators,
Yes.
Chinese diplomats. They call them wolf warrior diplomats.
Oh, do they?
They do.
That's a great title.
But apart from those lunatics, ambassadors' public statements are largely meaningless, I think, and should be taken with a grain of salt.
Well, yes. I mean, they've got a direct interest in constantly covering for their own country.
Yeah, it's almost like the art of diplomacy is saying nothing while appearing to say something.
Yes, through many words.
Indeed.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that Russia is hardly innocent on the border issue either. Because, I mean, they've taken Crimea, and they constantly apparently just physically move their own border in Ukraine as well. So it's not like the Russians are in any way innocent about, on the concept of borders. But I do think there is merit to the question of why is NATO now at Russia's border? Does make you wonder, doesn't it?
Yeah, and from a Russian perspective, that's a betrayal of the last 30 years of international relations.
So I believe even, was it? I think it was definitely Bush had said to them that they weren't going to. But I thought, was it Reagan as well? Did he say something similar?
Well, I think the agreement was made in the 1990s,
Right.
Was my understanding. But honestly, even in the 1990s, there was essentially almost a proxy conflict between the West and Russia over the breakup of Yugoslavia. And Russian diplomats said, although I haven't got the quote here, that even though America was supposed to be our friend, it wasn't a particularly nice friendship.
Yeah.
They didn't behave particularly like friends.
I can't say I'm terribly proud of our foreign policy towards Russia. Our being the West.
Yeah. Now, I won't go over what Western media is saying because you can find it for yourself and there's so much to go through. But just to briefly summarize, 140,000 troops are massing on the border. They're building field hospitals. They could invade at any moment. The invasion of Ukraine is imminent. All civilians and military advisors hurriedly withdrawn from Ukraine. The US moves its embassy from Kiev to Lviv away from the border and so on and so forth. War is very much possible. Oh my God, this is a disaster, what's happening? So that seems to be the general tenor from the West.
Oh, there's been nothing but. I mean, that's all I've seen being reported is, oh my God, something imminent's happening in Ukraine. And it's weird because it felt very much like just a very paper-thin media narrative, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, they might be correct. I'm not saying that. I mean, if as I'm speaking, all of a sudden there is invasion and Russian tanks cross the border, then hold me responsible. But it does seem like there is a large amount of catastrophizing here, and it's hard to really tell how justified it is. But we'll move on. The reaction from Ukraine, I think, is a little more balanced, and it's largely that the West.
Sorry about this. Before you go on, I think this is the one that really matters, right? This is the revealed preference. There's all this noise coming from media that's 20,000 miles away, but the people who are actually on the ground, I think their reaction seems to be the most important one.
Yep, I think that's fair. So let's see what they have to say. And Mr. Biden said he thinks Putin will move in on Ukraine, while Boris Johnson has warned that gloomy intelligence suggested Moscow was planning a lightning raid on Kiev. Meanwhile, personnel from both the US and UK embassies in the Ukrainian capital have been ordered home, a move that President Volodymyr Zelensky labelled overreacting. And what he's done instead...
Right.
So there have been reports that today is going to be the day of the invasion.
Yep.
And so in response to that, Zelensky has called for a so-called Day of Unity. He's created a new, one-off holiday for the whole of Ukraine. So he report here. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky on Monday called on the country's people to fly flags and sing the national anthem in unison on February the 16th, a date that some Western media say Russia could invade. Ukrainian government officials stressed that Zelensky was not predicting an attack on Wednesday, but responding skeptically to the foreign media reports. They tell us February 16th will be the day of the attack. We will make it a day of unity, Zelensky said in a video address to the nation. They are trying to frighten us by yet again naming a date for the start of military action, he said. On that day, we will hang our national flags, wear yellow and blue banners, and show the whole world our unity. Zelensky has long said that while he believes Russia is threatening to attack his country, the likelihood of an imminent invasion has been overstated by Western allies, responding to Moscow's efforts to intimidate Ukraine and sow panic.
It's very, very interesting. I mean, I'm sure a few days ago I saw a statement from Zelensky where he was just saying, I don't believe there's an invasion that's going to happen. Not just you're overreacting, but this is just flat out not true.
Right.
And I mean, don't quote me on that because I might be wrong. But I mean, if if this is the president of Ukraine, I would think that he would be more concerned if there was a genuine risk of an invasion.
But then again, you might say that it's his duty to show a calm face and make sure people don't panic or there's no mass exodus.
Yeah,
and things.
that is true.
Well,
but I think that if I was the president of a significant country and I was expecting the invasion, why aren't the Ukrainians massing an army?
I mean, they do have an army in the field at the moment surrounding East Donbass and Luhansk. They do have, I believe, 200,000 reservists on call.
But you'd be calling them up, wouldn't you?
Yes. Yes, but it's complicated because that could also be seen, as it was in World War I, as a casus belli.
Sure.
My neighbour is mobilising their reserves. They are obviously going to attack somewhere that justifies a preemptive strike. So it's difficult in that sense. But yeah, let's just consider. So from Putin's perspective, there are two main narratives as to what his goals are, as I can understand it. One of them is that he's looking at Ukraine and saying, look, this is backed heavily by the West, bordering the EU and NATO and so on. The longer I leave it, like if I leave this to my successor, the stronger Ukraine will get and the worse that will be for Russia. So maybe invading now will be bad, but it's better than all the alternatives. So that's the main narrative that's justifying the idea that Russia is going to invade. But then I think from what I've seen of Putin's geopolitics is he's an extremely canny operator.
Yes.
He is perhaps the last statesman left in Europe in that sense. He's certainly not above a lie or 20,000, and he will very sort of dispassionately lay out something in a way that convinces you that it is true and then go off and do something that is justified in hindsight because it works for Russia's interest. That's the art of realpolitik.
I think he is definitely playing 4D chess, to summarize that.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, to put it in 2 words instead of 20, sorry.
No. I think he definitely is.
And it could be that an invasion is an option. It's maybe a 1 in 10, 1 in 5 case he will invade. Maybe he's thinking about that. It's a possibility, but maybe he's just reacting pragmatically to developments on the ground, and maybe he thinks, well, okay, we can, when all of the West and their advisors run away without us even firing a shot, maybe that sends enough of a message to the world without.
I mean, look at what happened in Afghanistan.
Right.
So
So there's an article here. Is this just a massive overreaction? Let's lean on this case a bit. In Moscow, war drums aren't beating, and the public doesn't favour invasion. And that's another good point. It's not like the Russian public has been whipped up into a fever of ultranationalism about Ukraine. It's not like, for example, the People's Republic of China and Taiwan, where the people in mainland China are convinced that Taiwan is theirs and should be theirs any minute. That just isn't there in Russia as far as we can ascertain. On the phone from Moscow was Mikhail Gorbachev's longtime right-hand man, Pavel Palashchenko. At the Gorbachev Foundation, he's been trying to assess if a Ukraine invasion is likely or whether the West is overreacting. He leans to the latter. He's found certain things strange. In Vladimir Putin's state-controlled media, there's been no drumbeat for war. If the Kremlin leader is about to invade, isn't it likely that his propaganda machine would be making a big case for it? You would think so, said Mr. Palashchenko, who first worked with Mr. Gorbachev in 1985, so before the fall of the Soviet Union. As far as he can gauge public opinion, which isn't easy to do in Russia, he sees no appetite among the Russian people for a showdown. They don't want war. There's some complaints about NATO meddling in Ukraine, he said on Tuesday, but it's not a top-of-mind issue. The Western reaction is what is coming more severe. And you can definitely see from a Russian perspective, the rhetoric that's coming out of the West and the Western media, the hysteria.
it's mad.
It is. It's almost to the level, and I've seen some op-eds in Fox News and so on, where there are shills from the American military-industrial complex coming out of the woodwork to say, if there's any conflict in Ukraine, America has to get involved. We have to have boots on the ground, planes in the air, everything.
Well, this is what all Western leaders have been saying. Even Canada said, even Trudeau said something similar. It's like, really?
Right.
Canada's interested.
And you can imagine, if you just put yourself in the state of mind of a Russian at this point, it does not really seem from that perspective like Russia is being this evil aggressor with grand delusions of power. It seems like the far better financed and larger militaries of the West are encroaching on your doorstep and fomenting a crisis, which could be the justification for the conflict.
The counterpoint would be, well, they have already taken a part of Ukraine.
That's true.
And so you can't say they don't have expansionist ambitions. And as you said, Putin is a very canny operator. And maybe this, again, is part of that 4D chess where he is essentially saying, well, look, we're obviously going to do this. We obviously want Ukraine, but we're going to make them think that we're not going to do this. So they look insane. And so when we do finally make our move, people won't really believe them. They'll look mad. Whatever they do is an overreaction, blah, blah, blah.
Well, Putin, being a judo master, will probably know the Japanese saying from Miyamoto Musashi, which broadly speaking translates as only an idiot tells his enemy what he's about to do before he's going to do it. So yes, you could say that Russia explicitly denying things and saying the opposite, for example, when it comes to moving troops away, is actually a sign that something is going to happen rather than it isn't.
Sun Tzu's famous maxim, all warfare is based on deception.
And yes, you're right. We can see we have an approximate disposition of forces here. This was as of 15th of February, which is yesterday. So this is a map of Ukraine. Just familiarize yourself with that. You've got the main city, Kiev, very close to the Belarusian border. And Ukraine is literally surrounded from all sides because that little bubble there is Transnistria, which is a pro-Russian separatist region.
Yep.
They can attack from all points of the compass. So the strategic situation is pretty grim for Ukraine, even if it does have a large reserve force.
I imagine it's probably quite easy for them to move troops through Belarus as well, given the relationship between the two.
They are currently conducting a massive military exercise there. Those triangles are all Russian military units in Belarus.
Right. Yeah, no, I hadn't read that. Yeah, no. Okay, well, there we go.
Yeah, so they're already there. They could, at a moment's notice, probably a phone call from Putin, they could conduct one large pincer movement down towards Kiev from the north and one encircling the east from Crimea and Russia. So, yes, they do have, by the looks of it, strategic superiority here. But I can see no indication from any media, though I may be wrong, that Russia has properly mobilized its military reserves, which means that the battalion tactical groups in this map are in fact significantly below their wartime maximum strength. Russian motor rifle brigades and regiments consist of 2 full-strength professional battalions, as well as 1 understrength battalion that may be rapidly brought up to its full complement, and 1 more that is mainly staffed by conscripts. So within 5 to 7 days of mobilization, according to military analysts, this rises to 4 combat-ready battalions. But that mobilization has not happened, which would be a key indicator of conflict, you would think. But Twitter users have been tracking Russia's military buildup. Let's play this clip.
Чисто следующий. Avanzó. Я даже здесь сажусь.
For those who are listening,
Ну, стреляй по мне.
just keep coming.
О, акула идет, акула вот она. Сейчас. Стараюсь поближе ее заснять. Вот она. Замыкает.
Unfortunately, I don't speak Russian.
Should have got counted.
Над моим домом летает. Сохраняет. Вижу, как комаров.
See them just going off into the distance. It's very spooky.
А вон акулы пошли еще, смотри.
For us, who occasionally we
Раз,
see
так, там была одна, это вторая, третья. И вот четвертая еще. 4 акулы. И как они там
to
называются?
see a full unit of them like that. It's called something. But it's not just units on the ground. If we go to the next clip,
Зениточки,
This is from a
наш
train
поездочек,
driver.
сейчас мы его повезем на
he's
Орел.
got his smartphone out. He's like, "Hey, look at this!
Красавчик,
That is
стоят.
what looks like the motorized forces of an entire Russian division just sitting on the tracks, pointing in the opposite direction."
I can't help but notice all the snow.
Yeah, it's very cold, isn't it? It's still winter there.
Because I can't. I suppose we'll get to it afterwards. But this is why I think that Putin is playing 4D chess here.
Those that I don't know, I'm not a military expert, but that looks like mobile artillery.
Орел,
and
сейчас
some-
поедут парни
It's some kind of armor.
с
Isn't
нами.
it?
Мы их повезем, вот этих
Yeah.
вот
Well, I'd
зениточек.
like to be on the receiving end of that. Then if we go to the next clip, sorry, I'm taking time to go through all of these just so that you can see what's happening
Yeah,
on the
yeah.
ground. So this is an actual infantry unit just chilling out by the side of the road, and all of their equipment are in white winter camo. And then if we go to the next one, this is from an armoured exercise that's taking place in Belarus. I believe this is official, but I'm not entirely sure. And you can just see all of these vehicles in perfect working order, driving around, doing armed things. Then finally we have this one here, which just shows what is looks like a line of tanks just parked to the side of a road, going back in a dirty grey
Wow.
column on the asphalt. So yeah, and that is the physical pictures of the military build-up. And if we go back to the strategic map, I've done a little reading, and it's worth comparing this strategic build-up to one which was done last year. So last year there was a big series of Russian military exercises called Zapad 2021, and analysts thought there might be an invasion of Ukraine last year, and so they're comparing what happened then to what happens now.
Okay.
So I'll read quickly. Taken together, the scale of the Russian build-up near Ukraine in 2021 suggested that the Russian forces were prepared to undertake deep offensive operations rather than be used simply as a deterrent against perceived Ukrainian attempts to retake Donbass. After the Kremlin achieved its political objectives, e.g. testing the West and pressuring the Ukrainian government by other means, it announced a drawdown of some forces deployed at the border. While this decision may have de-escalated the situation, pre-positioned Russian equipment at Pognovo remained unchanged until late July, when Russian forces began to move the equipment in a yet unknown direction. This movement coincided with the introduction of Russian units into Belarus for the September drills. These two developments indicate that Russia is moving and building up its forces in anticipation of the active phase of the Zapad 2021 exercise. They continue. In the months and weeks before the exercise, Zapad 2017, there were fears that Russia could either leave its troops behind in Belarus and dominate the country militarily, or that Zapad was a readiness exercise that disguised a more belligerent plan to attack the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia.
So there are significant Russian enclaves in the Baltics as well, aren't there?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah.
And they are ex-Soviet nations, of course.
Yeah.
The Zapad 2017 scare nevertheless had an interesting origin. It seems that the entire narrative that shaped Western concerns about the drill rested on one story about logistical preparations for the exercise. It alleged that the Russian armed forces rented 4,162 flat rail cars in 2017 for the delivery of military cargo to Belarus there and back, which would presumably allow the redeployment of a motor rifle division. in addition to what had already been planned to be sent to Belarus. However, the new division, even if deployed, certainly would not have changed Russia's military posture from defensive to offensive simply because the force was too small. Deployment of its division-level unit should have been regarded as a signalling effort at best, rather than a genuine attempt to conduct offensive operations against a neighbouring state. And if we go on here, we have a quick comparison of the Russian and Russian-Ukraine military forces. Who are you putting the money on, do you think?
Well, Russia have a vast superiority.
Yeah. 900,000 active duty troops, 2 million reservists, nearly 10,000 tanks, 6,000 artillery pieces, 2,000 combat aircraft as opposed to 160.
But this leaves out any American intervention,
It does,
of course.
or NATO intervention.
Yeah.
And so, there is a load more that I could go through, but I think I'm going to leave it there. Fundamentally, some people have said that the invasion risk is now decreasing. It may seem that tensions will remain at this high level while both sides maneuver for advantage. As I said before we started, it reminds me of a game of chess, blitz chess, where a flurry of moves are being made on the board, but no pieces are yet being taken.
I honestly think that Putin's gaslighting our leaders. I think he's gaslighting through the media, because I think he's worked out. Because, like, if you listen to Putin's critiques of the way the West operates, they're surprisingly incisive. And I think he's realized that the media actually has a terrifying and terrible effect on public opinion. And public opinion has a terrible effect on the opinion of what goes on with politicians. And it's created a kind of very negative feedback loop. And so all he has to do is just move things around. And we have worked ourselves up into this absolute froth. And he can just say, well, this was just a routine exercise. What are you talking about? Just pull his troops back, or say, well, we're just exercising in Belarus. What are you talking about? We do this all the time. We did this last year. And so it is making, again, it seems to be like harking back to sort of Soviet tactics of making your opponent not be sure about their own perception of reality. And I do wonder how much of this is just him playing a game with them. Because I honestly think that our statesmen are sorely lacking. And as you said, he's probably the last statesman in Europe, and it seems that way.
Yeah,
I mean, there's so much invested in Russia when it comes to Europe's heating, for a start. And the fact that he's doing this in the winter, and there are so many small tells that make me think, okay, he's not stupid. He knows that, okay, if he invades Ukraine, it's going to be all-out war, and at the end of the day, I don't think Russia can win that. No. And that's the thing. And I think he knows that as well. And so he's playing the slow game, a war of position, where he gets what he can while he can, like Donetsk, Crimea. Small, it grows Russian influence, outmaneuvers the West diplomatically, and makes us look like we're insane. The fact that the media hasn't bitten their tongue slightly and toned down the position makes us look, and the fact that our politicians react to what the media does and says, it makes us look like we're kind of unhinged and we're terrified. And you put that in context with Biden's absurd withdrawal from Afghanistan, and it makes the West look weak and useless, and it makes our allies doubt us.
But I think he understands as well the incentive structures that are operating within media. Like the first platform to generate a really big clickbaity headline that Russia's going to destroy Ukraine, it gets the most clicks. So they're actually competing with each other to hype the situation up into ridiculous hysteria. So he doesn't even have to do that much.
Exactly. That's the thing. If he just moves units into Belarus for a routine training exercise and moves them back, that's the entire Western media in this giant hysterical state. And what have they really done? Nothing. And so I wonder how much of it is a game that's being played at our expense.
Yep.
If you enjoyed that segment from the podcast, The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as this video, which is Thomas Dowling's Critical Base Theory series, this one on the cost of modernity. But if you want to follow Thomas, you can also follow him on Getter at Thomas Dowling on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.